Welcome to the Articulation Therapy training for articulation disorders. If you are on this training, you are likely to either be working with a child with an articulation disorder or have your own child with an articulation disorder. Articulation therapy involves teaching the child where in the mouth the sound is made. Is it made at the back or at the front of the mouth? And also how to produce the sound correctly. Is it a long sound like S or F, or is it a short sound like P or T? Also, is it loud like B, 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 or is it quiet like P? Here are some tips of how to help the child that you're working with say the sounds correctly. Give your child a simple explanation of where the sound is made and show them by making this sound yourself. Try cued articulation. Videos of this are available on YouTube, but you can also watch the Introduction to Speech video provided by Surrey Council. Use a mirror to help the child see how they should be making the sound. Give really specific feedback for what the child is doing well or what they can do to improve. For example, good try, you got your tongue right back. Keep it short and keep it fun. 5 minutes a day is much more effective than 30 minutes once a week. If they were really struggling to make a particular sound, take a break and come back to it. Acknowledge that it's hard work. They might not always get it right, but keep trying. It can take a really long time, so try to help them avoid becoming frustrated. Now we are going to talk about the different stages of articulation therapy. As we go through this, think about a child that you might be working with and the sounds that you need to have in mind. Your school's link therapist will help you to pick up on these sounds, and they are likely to be in their speech report or in feedback from their speech screen. The first stage is practicing the sound on its own, and with all stages you must not move on from the stage you're on until the child is able to do this confidently. When you're asking the child to produce the sound, for example, P or S, initially model it for them and be extra careful not to do an after it, for example, P or S. Emphasize what your sound is doing so the child has a clear model to copy. For example, if practicing a P, emphasize that at the start of the sound your lips start pressed together and they end apart. P. Give really specific feedback. Think about the sound that you might be prompting and feedback that you may need to give. Provide visuals to support the child to say the sound. So your link therapist may provide you with some, but you could also use whichever sound system your school uses, Nuffield symbols or articulograms, which will be provided by the therapist. At this stage, sound in isolation, repetition is really key. Once the child is able to produce the sound correctly, use something like a pop-it toy to count between 50 and 100 repetitions per practice of each sound. If the child is not producing the sound correctly, avoid the repetitions to avoid negative practice and instead focus more on giving feedback to the child to support them on how to place their articulators, for example, tongue up, back, forward, or lips together. You're aiming for 50 to 100 p, 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 or s, 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 s. Once the child is able to produce a clear sound in isolation, e.g. p, 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 d, 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 or s, then you can move on to adding a vowel. You need to combine the sound with a range of vowels, but not all children are able to do this straight away, and they need to build up with practice. What we are aiming for is a smooth transition from the consonant to the vowel. For example, si, su, sa. If we do this without practice and without doing it gradually, it's likely that the child will revert to their previous error. For example, they'll go stew. We need to build up from saying the sounds separately to gradually blending them together. To do this, use visuals to represent the consonant and a range of vowels and ask the child to say them separately. For example, in the picture, s, oo. Gradually reduce this gap between the target sound and the vowel until you have a smooth transition between the two. For example, s, oo, s, oo, s, oo, s, oo. You may find that once they get to the stage of not having the gap, sue, that they revert to the error again and they might go stew. And at this point, you need to increase the gap again and try again. S-oo. Sometimes it helps to breathe in between the two sounds and it helps to avoid that sound sneaking back in. So. Repeat this method with a range of vowels, and once the child can do this with multiple vowels, for example, si, sa, si, sa, repeat with the vowel first. For example, u, s, e, s. Again, as with stage 1, repetition is really key here, and you're aiming for 50 to 100 repetitions every time you practice. Once the child is able to blend the target sound with a range of vowels, for example, su, si, os, us, you can start working on the sounds in words. The therapist in your school can provide you with some word lists to support this. However, there are many websites available, such as Mommy Speech Therapy, that have a huge range of free picture resources of words sorted by initial, medial and final sound. When practicing, initially start with words with the sound at the beginning of the word in short words. For example, sun, sit, sat. Then build up to longer words, e.g. sitting, sunshine. Try to avoid words that are more difficult. For example, words that have a blend, so two consonants together, like slip, snake, sweets. And avoid words that are longer, so multisyllabic words like stethoscope or caterpillar, or words that have more than one of the target sound, like sisters. Once the child is able to produce the sound at the beginning of words, then move on to producing the sound at the end of words and then the middle of words in that order. Use the same strategies as before, starting with simple words, avoiding blends and multisyllabic words. Give really specific feedback so the child knows what they did well and can do it again. Use specific language such as, I could really hear the long sound at the beginning of sit, well done. It also helps to use words that are familiar and functional for the child. So see if you can make a list of words beginning or ending or having the sound in the middle of the word that are relevant to them to practice. Once the child is able to produce the sound in a range of words in all word positions, you can support them to say the sounds in sentences. You can put the sound into short sentences such as the sand or big sun and use cued articulation to prompt the child to produce the target sound accurately when it comes up in the sentence. For example, the sand, big sun. You can gradually increase the length of these sentences to make them more difficult, depending on the child's success. So if the child is having difficulty remembering to use the target sound in a short sentence, do not increase the sentence length. However, when you do increase the sentence length, remember to use cued articulation to prompt every time the target sound is produced. For example, Sammy sat on sand. Once the child is able to produce the sound in all word positions in short sentences, increase the complexity of these. The next stage is making silly sentences, where you practice the sound in multiple words and positions in long sentences. You could also use tongue twisters. Remember, use your prompts throughout. For example, the seal in the sea wearing sunglasses. There are resources that your therapist can provide you with that have lots of the target sound in multiple words in a picture. However, if you search Google for busy picture and then write the target sound, so s or p or t words, you will get lots of free resources pop up in the images. The final stage is practicing the sound in conversation in everyday speech so that the child generalises this skill. You want to prompt the child to produce the sound during conversations and play games where the child must produce the sound correctly when telling the story or answering a question in order to take a turn. Now we will go through some specific tips for particular sounds. If some of the sounds that you are working on are not listed here, please contact your link therapist for ideas on how to produce those sounds. For the p sound, try blowing raspberries or puffing air in the cheeks, for example, p, and then releasing. Try making a sound when opening and closing the lips to encourage that puff of air, for example, p. For t, practice a sound while tapping the top of the mouth with the tongue, for example, you could also make a th for thing into a short sound, for example, th, 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 th. For k, use the magic finger technique. Hold down the tip of your tongue with your magic finger. So ask the child if they have a magic finger and they can do it with their tongue. For example, k, k. If they are holding down the front of their tongue, it's very difficult for it to go up to produce a t sound, which a lot of children do when trying to produce a k. It can also help to lie on the floor with their head back when producing this sound, as gravity pulls their tongue back to the back of their mouth to produce the sound. If the child is already able to make a g sound, see if they can do this quietly, k, which will produce the k. For the f sound, support the child to bite their lower lip and pretend to be a rabbit. And while they're doing this, ask them to blow. If the child is missing their front teeth when you're practicing, it might be worth waiting for their teeth to come through so that they can feel this prompt. While they're doing it, see if they can put their hand here and feel the air blowing on it. Something else that can help is putting a straw between their lip and their teeth and asking them to bite it. This will help them get their teeth into the correct position for the sound. For the s sound, try repeating t very quickly. Sometimes it helps to write this down on a piece of paper and point to t, 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 t as the child says it. Encourage the child to speed up and say the t as quickly as possible, t, 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 and they will find that it turns into a s sound. Gradually reduce the number of t's and see if they can produce it just with one t at the start. For example, t, 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 t. Another method is producing a sh sound and seeing if they can slide this forwards along the top of their mouth. For example, sh, and encourage them to smile as they do it. The next method is producing a th for thing sound and moving their tongue backwards. For example, you'll notice with both the sh method and the th method, I'm smiling as I produce this sound, which will encourage the tongue into the correct position. For any loud sounds, such as b, d, or g, practice making the quiet equivalent, for example, p, p, t, t, k, k, and making it noisy, b, d, g. This will produce the sound loudly and correctly. Here are some top tips to know before you start work on speech sounds. Read through the targets with the speech and language therapist. This might be targets that the therapist has set through a review with the child, or it might have been set through reading through a speech screen. Make a note of anything that the child is finding difficult to discuss with the therapist when they are in, and make sure that you are working on the target sounds that the therapist has selected. For all of the therapy, repetitions is key. The more repetitions of each sound, the better for learning and retention to take place. So at each level, isolation, consonant plus a vowel, in words and in sentences, you're aiming for 50 to 100 repetitions each time. For example, 50 times. I find it helps to have a toy such as a pop-it toy so that the child can visually see the countdown of how many times they have to produce the sound. Create a timetable with the child to ensure regular practice. Little and often short and regular practice is most effective and much more effective than doing half an hour once a week. Do not move on to the next stage until the child is confident on the current stage. For example, if the child isn't yet confident on producing the sound in a consonant vowel structure, for example, he, they will really struggle to produce this in words, for example, seesaw. Use games to motivate the child, but try not to let these take over the session. It's helpful to do 5-10 minutes of speech sounds on its own and then play a game as a reward at the end. Use visual cues. You can use whichever cues you like, but the therapist may have suggested some cues in particular. We may suggest using visuals such as Nuffield, Jollyphonics or articulograms. You may want to use the visuals that your school uses. Always use cued articulation wherever possible, making sure that you particularly remember to use the sign for the sound that you are practicing. When demonstrating sounds to the child, overemphasize the shapes and sound that your mouth is making when modelling. For example, see. Use mirrors to show the child how to move their mouth. Thank you for watching Articulation Therapy for Articulation Disorders. If you have any questions that have not been answered through this presentation, please contact your link therapist for your school and they will be able to help.